asparagus, some Gouda Parmesan mac, and honey cornbread for dinner. So let's start by getting our acorn squash kind of sliced open and ready to cook up in the oven. So I kind of cut them right down the middle through there so that you have kind of two nice little boats that will sit on our baking sheet. Here. I will say they're not the easiest squash to cut through, but they are delicious. And there's still a sticker on this one. Winner, winner. Okay. I'm going to remove our sticker. And then we're going to scoop out the guts and we're going to place them with the insides facing down on our baking sheet so that they kind of steam up inside and cook themselves a little bit faster. So it's just a really easy way to cook them up. And then at the end, we'll season them with a little bit of butter, brown sugar, and garlic salt. It is my favorite way to do acorn squash. I feel like these are like the seediest ones. So we'll scoop these guys out. I just use a good, kitchen spoon. And you don't have to get all of the stringiness, that all will get tender with it, so you don't have to keep scraping it until you've got a smooth base for it. Because all those are just edible as well. There we go. I just always feel like pork chops, acorn squash, just the sweetness of it just pairs really well with it. Okay, so all you do for now, it's really simple. We're just gonna place them on our baking sheet like this. That way, what happens is it kind of creates a little steam pocket in there and it kind of traps it in there so that you can get this in there. I don't want to have to move to a bigger one. We're going to have to move to a bigger baking sheet. These are really large ones. Let's see. Let me grab. Okay. Bigger baking sheet it is. You want them to sit down there. I didn't want to leave any air gap in it. These are pretty massive squash, so I guess I should realize they weren't going to fit.
You have a question? Are acorn squash sweet or savory?
They've got that sweetness to them, but not as sweet as, we're going to pop them in the oven, but not as sweet as like a butternut squash or pumpkin. They're a little bit more mild in it, but their texture is a little bit more like pumpkin. I like to do a mixture of garlic salt and brown sugar. The brown sugar really plays with the sweetness of it, but it's more of a mild one. We have it at 350 because that is what we're going to be baking our corn muffins at. So we have those cooking up because those are going to be in there for the whole time because they take the longest to kind of roast up and get tender, but they're really easy at the final part of it. Okay, we've got those going. I turn my water up, kind of bring it to a boil here so we can get our noodles cooking. But while we're doing that, let's work on our cornbread. So we're going to do our wet base for this first. So we're going to use 1 1/4 cup buttermilk. If you don't have buttermilk, you can do, and this is what I do most of the time, I take about half of 1 1/4 cup, divide it in half, and do half cream, half milk, and then I squeeze the juice from half a lemon over it to give it that tang. It will also give it that texture more for it, and it just works great to give you that same flavor and kind of cooking basis for it. So 1 1/4 cups of buttermilk in here. We're going to add in 2 eggs. So 1, whoops, and 2. Get my hands a quick wash there. Oh, slippery egg. eggs. We're gonna kind of pop our yolks. That way we can kind of mix it into our buttermilk. And then we're gonna add in our honey and our butter and our sugar. And then we'll do our baking soda and our salt. And then finally our cornmeal and our flour for our honey butter corn bread. We're gonna do corn muffins today, but these were such a hit earlier in the week. My daughter was like, as I dropped her off her soccer practice, she's like, please, can you make them again? And I'm like, okay. So we want 2 tablespoons of honey. Now this is just a little bit of honey that we're adding, and now we're also gonna be brushing them with a honey butter, which is where they get that really good pop of flavor. So I'm gonna just kind of dissolve that honey up in here. We're gonna add in a 1/2 cup of melted butter. Here we go. And these are, again, I never have leftovers of these. These are the ones where my kids probably wish I made a double recipe because this is like their favorite. And it's that perfect kind of sweetness to and moist and delicious. Okay. Then we're gonna add in 2/3 cup of granulated sugar. You can use brown sugar if you want to. That is gonna give it a little bit of a richer kind of flavor to it, but it works well on there. So 2/3 of granulated sugar. There we go. And then we're gonna add in a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And I did use salted butter, but if you were gonna use unsalted butter, you'd wanna add a little bit more salt, just a pinch more. And then we're gonna add in a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. So baking soda, not powder. And just a 1/2 teaspoon. We're gonna mix that in until it's all like thoroughly incorporated. And then we'll add in our cornmeal and our flour. But you want to make sure you've got this in the wet ingredients first. There we go. Perfect. And then just make sure it's all mixed up. And then we're going to add in a cup of cornmeal and a cup of flour. Use all-purpose flour. More on there. There we go. So 1 cup of flour.
And how much milk was it?
It is 1 1/4 cups of buttermilk. Now, again, most people don't use buttermilk, so if you don't have it, what I do is I kind of take 1/2 of that and make it cream, 1/2 of it is milk, and then I pour or squeeze some 1/2 lemon over it, and that will kind of give you that sourness of the buttermilk as well as kind of turn that cream into a little thicker, almost curdling it. And then we're going to add in a cup of cornmeal. We'll mix those in and they will be ready. Now, this is a butter base, so just don't over mix it because that will give you a stiffer corn muffin versus a really nice and fluffy corn muffin. Here we go. So we're just gonna mix it until all that kind of the powderness is gone, but it's still gonna be lumpy on there. Here we go. And beautiful. And then I'm doing mine in muffin tins today, or muffins, but you can also do them in mini loaves. You can do them in a 9 by 9 inch pan or an 8 by 8 inch. Just depending on what size that you use, your baking time is gonna change. So for muffins, these are gonna take about 22 minutes. Mini loaves take anywhere between 22 and 25 minutes. And then if you're gonna do an 8 by 8 or a 9 by 9, that is gonna take like around 33 to 35 minutes.
Should have done the honeycombs.
You're right, I should have. That would have been cute.
Where can I find this recipe?
So I do have this recipe card out there for our members, so they can always just go back and look for the honey butter cornbread things. But for everybody else, we do post our lives on the link on our page, so you can always rewatch and recreate the recipe by watching it. I make sure I go through every ingredient that we use, their measurement, as well as how long it needs to cook. Okay, I'm going to scoop this cornbread mixture into my muffin tins, and then I'll go back over and even it out. There we go, but I want to make sure. I decided to do muffins this way because the kids can have more than one, and there won't be fights over who gets the last one. When I did it earlier in the week, or was it last week, I did loaves, and my mini loaf pan only makes 8 loaves, which then there's only 1 or 2 loaves typically left over. And then it's a fight over who gets it or who splits it, and did they evenly split it. So muffins, you get a little less with, but they can take, the ones who really like it can take 2.
Yeah, then they're just going to fight over the third.
Well, we'll just say everybody can have 2. Here we go. There's always, no matter what, there's always a fight. But these are so good. Always the hardest is when I'm making them and I'm like, okay, we gotta save some for my parents. And they're like, do we have to? And I'm like, yes, we have to save one. And they're like, are we sure they need a full one? And I'm like, yes. Okay, now I'm just gonna go back and evenly fill all of these guys out so that they kind of bake up at the same time. And then we'll start cooking our noodles and get our pork chop seasoned up. We'll prep our asparagus and get this show on the road. Okay. I think I've got these as scooped up as I can get. I'm just gonna get a little paper towel to clean it off. I always say take the extra 10 seconds to clean your little drizzle here, and get this nice and clean. Here we go, because it's once it bakes on, it's much harder to clean off, but if you get it now, then your hands are much easier to clean. Okay, let's go pop these in the oven. And we'll let them bake up at 350 for 22 minutes. These should be perfect on there. And rotate. Haha. They can both be on the top. Excellent. And then I'm going to set my timer for 22 minutes.
Do you have any suggestions for a different type of side dish for Thanksgiving? So outside the box?
Outside the box. I don't know. I had to think about it because I feel like my family is so stuck in the exact same meal that we've had since like 1988, since I was born. So it could have been going on longer than that. But I'll have to think about it. I feel like there's always so many like new ideas out there.
CJ says corn souffle. I like that idea.
You know what? I do love a good corn souffle. I think they are delicious. There's this restaurant in the middle of nowhere, Iowa, and it was called I believe it's like the Four Brothers, but it was like a bougie restaurant in like rural Iowa, and it had the best corn souffles there. They're just delicious. Let's get our pork chops seasoned up here. These are kind of a thin cut pork chop, which means they're going to cook up fairly quickly, which means that I can just finish them off and saute them in my pan perfectly. If you get the thick cuts, which are one of my favorites, those I like to sear off on both sides, and then I finish up in the oven to kind of make sure they stay nice and juicy. But we're gonna start with a little bit of Worcestershire sauce, and we're gonna season both sides of these pork chops. Here we go. And the Worcestershire, even if you don't like Worcestershire by itself, you don't taste it in the very end, but the acidity of it cuts through the fat of the pork chop and makes it really juicy and delicious. So I highly recommend using it. We're gonna give a nice sprinkle of onion powder. This is gonna give a lovely savory flavor, as well as kind of give it a nice little kind of crust on it. It browns up really nicely. And then we're gonna do Mrs. Dash's table blend. We're keeping it pretty simple today. Sometimes I do like a sweet pork chop or a Cajun pork chop, or I've done Italian herbs pork chop. This one's like my base recipe, which I just think is delicious. It's simple but delicious. Okay, we've got our nice base of that. Then we're gonna do a little bit of black pepper. And again, we are going to season both sides on this, but I love a good amount of spices and seasoning on here. Just gives it so much flavor. And then last, definitely not least, our garlic salt. Give it a good shaky shake. Okay. And then we'll flip these over and we're gonna season the other side. But my water is boiling here, so let's drop in our, we're doing shells today because I always buy like the weirdest pasta shapes and everything like that. And so I never have traditional or macaroni, but we're gonna do a Gouda and Parmesan shells. I was almost tempted because I have dinosaur noodles and ABC noodles, and I thought maybe I should do those. But the little ones love it when I do that for lunch. Okay, I'm not gonna add in my full bag here, because this is just a side dish and not a full thing. So just about, you know, like a third or a little bit more. And let me get, we'll use this spoon. Give this a good stir. We'll let it kind of cook up here. And then let's flip our pork chops over and we're gonna season these guys on the other side. And that's, you gotta make sure you season both sides because you want all that flavor to get in there. You don't want any blandness. And it might seem like, oh, that's way too much, but trust me, it's not. It's gonna have the great flavor to it in every bite, but it's not gonna be overpowering. Here we go. So, got each guy flipped over now. And we're gonna go back over with our base here. So we've got our Worcestershire, a little drizzle. And I will say, this is the key to not having dry pork chops. I feel like pork chops are one of those that can go dry pretty fast. This is the way you do it. We're gonna do onion powder. Nice little coating over it. Here we go. And then we're gonna do Mrs. Dash's table blend. I love the table blend versus the original because it is blended, or it's like pulverized, so it's nice and smooth on it, so it doesn't get, it's not too chunky in spices. Here we go. A little more on that one. And then we're gonna do a little black pepper. Nice little sprinkle over it. And then a little bit of garlic salt. Here we go. And we've got our pork chops nice and seasoned up here. Okay, let me give my noodles a little bit of a stir here. And then we can start prepping up our asparagus. I'll start cooking these off in a second, but I do want to give them, you know, a little minute to kind of soak in those yummy flavors before we start searing it off. But they don't need to marinate in it because this is kind of what I like to say, like a quick marinade, a quick spice thing. So it's really more like a dry spice on it that you'll saute up. Okay, we have some asparagus, and this is my favorite way when asparagus is really skinny. I love it this way versus sometimes you get them and they're like trees. So we're gonna cut off the bottom tip. Now, always, you might feel like it's wasteful, but you wanna cut off this whole bottom inch of asparagus because where it's been cut off, it is really dry and stringy and chewy, and it's not good to eat. It will be like as if you're chewing on like a twig. So make sure you cut it off. That way you have just that tender part of the asparagus, and it will give you a much better end product. I know it does feel like you're being wasteful because you are cutting off a good chunk, but trust me, you need to do it. Otherwise, it will be like a twig. Spread these out. I'm going to do these in the oven because that's a really simple and delicious way to do it. But we'll season them up. And there's a little. So we're just going to give them a nice little drizzle of olive oil. And I'm just going to drizzle it over it, and then we'll roll them back and forth to kind of coat them up. Some garlic salt, a little bit of onion powder, and a little bit of black pepper. And the black pepper really makes it pop. And then just take your hands and kind of roll them back and forth to kind of coat them up. This is going to allow the seasoning to kind of coat them all the way around. And then when you kind of roast them up, they'll get this nice kind of tender crisp to it. Now these are really thin ones. I like never find them this thin, which I absolutely love, which means they'll cook up a lot faster than the thick ones. So we won't add these in until a little bit closer to time. So let me get my hands. Going here, and then we're going to cook up our pork chops, and then we'll saute up some onions to go with our pork chops after we cook them off in their drippings.
You have a question? How long have you been cooking?
I have been cooking since I was 13 years old. I actually started taking over cooking family dinners when I was 13, and I've just always loved cooking. I've really enjoyed it, and my parents have always been really good about fostering my love for cooking. Mainly for their benefit. But I've been cooking so like almost, 25 years. I'm not 38 yet. Still hold on to my things, but for a good almost quarter of a century. Which, it's funny, like over the years, like the different food trends, when I think back and I cook something, I'm like, oh, this was really big in the early 2000s, or how I used to cook and how I've gotten better with time, just, practice, reading up new techniques. We've got our shells here. While we're waiting for our olive oil to kind of heat up to sear off our pork chops, I am going to get my little grater out and start grating some fresh Parmesan cheese, because this will take me a hot minute. But fresh Parmesan is so much better than free one. It's creamier, which I think is really nice when you're doing a mac and cheese. Already grated ones tends to dry out, so it's not quite as creamy. So we're gonna grate up. I'm gonna use about, we'll see how long until I fatigue in grating the Parmesan cheese, but I want to get to around a cup. But it's not the most fun thing to do. And this is like, I feel like whenever I make anything like a cheesy pasta, My oldest daughter always wants me to grate her Parmesan cheese, not her grating it herself, but she wants me to. And it's like sitting there and I'm like, do. And I was like, you are going to say stop eventually. And she's like, oh, well, you missed the noodle over here. And then she gets on to it. When she starts, then everybody needs freshly grated on. So we'll get there. You know, I used to think there was a huge difference, you know, but there really is. It's just a lot creamier because it's not as dried out. Here we go. Not so much fun. We'll take a little break because my hands are tired. My oil, let's test it. Not quite yet. Once it kind of gets a nice sizzle pop, we'll throw them on. I'll turn down the heat and then we're going to sear them off. I'm going to do about 4 on each side. And it looks like it's good now. So I'm going to turn it down to about a 6. So it's a little bit higher than a, medium. And we're going to pop these guys in here. Let's see. I'm going to make sure I can. We've got to kind of Tetris it up here to make them fit. Here we go. So I got base 4 in here. We're gonna sear these off, cook them on both sides, then we'll pull them off and do the next batch. And then I will make a nice little sauteed onion in the drippings. I might do like a creamy onion gravy with it because my kids love gravy. Go. And that's good. Okay, let's check a noodle here. I think they're getting close to being done. They feel soft. No. Almost, but not quite. While we're waiting, I'm going to prep my onions. And then I'll grate some more. And grate some more. Okay. So we're going to saute our onions off. I've got 1 yellow onion. We're going to saute it off and our drippings in our pan. And then I'll add in maybe a little bit of cream, or I might just do butter. I'll see when I get there how I feel with it. But sauteed onions on pork chops are just delicious. I'll also put in a little bit of fresh garlic on there. And this will just add some nice flavor to it. I'm going to do long and skinny because I feel like when you do it with onions, like on a pork chop, you want those stringy caramelized onions. So we'll do nice little thin strings. I feel like last time I made pork chops, I made crispy onions on there because Torrin loves crispy onions. And he asked for that, and I was like, oh, it was delicious. But we're going to do caramelized onions today. Again, I'm cutting them fairly thin so that when they'll caramelize up and they'll just be very lovely. Okay, so I've got my onions, and then we're going to just mince up some garlic. Do one more. This is going to be about close to a tablespoon of fresh garlic minced up, but if you're going to use some garlic, I'd use maybe a smidge less on it. Start by kind of giving it a coarse chop, and then I'm going to mince it up. There we go. And I feel like fresh garlic is a little bit more mellow, which I think is a little bit nicer in this, but garlic is always great to use. I find the biggest difference is the acidity level. Garlic is a lot more acidic, and it's more of an intense, where I feel like fresh garlic is more mellow in the flavoring, but strong too. There we go. So we'll get these guys nice and minced up. And then I'm going to rotate my pan here. Get the nice hot side over there. Let's give our noodles a quick stir. And we'll get a little bit more grated cheese.
You have a question? Have you ever cut yourself?
Yes, I have. Actually, the biggest thing, I haven't cut myself in a long time, but my biggest thing is I will burn myself. I like nick my arms against the oven, the stove. So I burn myself a lot more than I cut. But in my younger years, I actually got stitches from cooking when I was like 15 years old, cutting chicken. So, yes, I have, but I will say I'm more likely to burn myself because I like to reach in and not as cautious as I should be. Okay, let's get these guys flipped over. I can see kind of a white ring forming over them. Beautiful. We've got this nice kind of syrup. They are thinner pork chops, which means they are going to cook up faster. A lot of people have this issue where your pork chops will curl. That is because of the vein of fat that goes right there. All you do is get a kitchen shear, and if you just snip it right there, your pork chop will lay flat. So anywhere it curls up because you have that strip of fat, give it a little snip, and it will lay fat and cook more evenly. Okay, my noodles should be done now, so let's try one more. Yep, they are definitely done. Let's strain these. I'm not going to use any of my starchy water in this base because it's kind of a mac and cheese, which is a little bit richer of a sauce. So we'll strain these guys. Take out any excess water. We're going to put this back in here. And then we're going to put in about a half a stick of butter, and we're going to let it melt. The other half of this butter is going to go for my honey butter cornbread, because we will make a honey butter that we brush over the top of each muffin. So I'm just going to put that when we're ready to have that start melting in just a little bit. Once the butter has all melted, we'll add in our cream and we'll slowly warm it up, but you don't want to have it, I don't like to turn the heat on until that cream is started to warm up and the butter, and then we'll add our cheese in because you don't want it to like burn and stick to the bottom of your pan. And the residual heat works really well with this. So we've got it coated, and that butter is all melted up. So let me grab my cream. And we're gonna add probably around a half a cup altogether, because you need a good base for it to have your cheese melt into it. I do not like to add flour to my mac and cheese. I like to do kind of a cheesy cream, like a creamy cheese base on it versus making a roux and adding milk and flour to it. Now, the plus side of doing a roux and the flour is that next day mac and cheese is still creamy. If you do it this way, your mac and cheese will firm up the next day. But if you kind of heat it up and make sure it's completely melted, then it goes out. But most of the time, we never have any mac and cheese left over. So I love it this way because I feel like it tastes just a little bit nicer. These are just about done. So I'm gonna grab a plate and then we're gonna switch these off. And also knowing that your pork chops are going to continue to cook when you take them off. So you don't want to overcook them knowing that they're going to cook a lot more. And again, these are pretty thin pork chops, so they're going to cook up pretty fast.
Do you have a cookbook?
I do not have a cookbook, but that is in my plans in the works for this next year. But I do send out recipe cards for our members every week about, 3 a week based on recipes that we cook during it. And I have my lives that are available for everybody. So it's kind of like a digital cookbook. At least, my kids will have that ability to go back and watch me cook and learn how to cook, their recipes, any of their favorite ones when they get older, and hopefully teach them how to. And I've got my, let me feng shui this one a little bit better. There we go. Got it in there. Beautiful. I always like to have just a smidge of breathing room between each one because I find they just cook up a little bit nicer when they're not sharing their heat. Okay, slide this guy over here. Let me check on, let me go grab our cornbread out in here in just a second. Let me give this a good stir, and then when we come back, we'll turn this on and kind of get our residual heat going here. So let's go get our cornbread out. We're gonna pop our asparagus in when we do that, and then we're gonna finish off our pork chops and everything. These, since they are small asparagus, they're gonna cook pretty fast. Let me just get this. We wanna kind of do a nice thing, but look at these. Perfect. Look at our beautiful cornbread. Giving a little touch there. And I'm going to slide these guys in here, and instead of doing it at 350, I'm going to turn my oven to my air fryer setting, which is essentially the same thing as like a convection bake. And I'm gonna do it at 425. That's gonna allow those asparagus to cook up nice and fast, and we'll finish up my butternut squash, or my acorn squash. Okay, we've got our lovely cornbread here. And I'm going to melt our butter and add a little bit of honey to it. And that is going to be our honey butter that we're gonna brush over the tops of our cornbread. It looks like I had a little sugar burst out on there. Must have been a little granule. We're gonna add 2 tablespoons of honey in here with our 1/4 of a cup of butter. And you just wanna melt the butter, heat it up until you've got just a small little boil, and then turn it off. You don't wanna heat it too long, or you're gonna make candy, because the sugar content will crystallize. So I'm gonna bring it down and kind of heat it over a low for it. Let me check my pork chops here. See if they're ready to flip, if it wants to. There we go. Now this one, let me grab, where did I put my scissors? Right over here. So see how mine is kind of curling here? Just gonna cut a little snip. That's cutting that fat vein so it will then lay flat. There we go. And then I'm gonna have to, I always find this. One goes in right, and then the next way does not go in. There we go. Okay, almost. Okay, let's get, we can see, I'm gonna turn my pasta now on really low over here. You can see our cream has already reduced a little bit, so it's already nice and thick. We're gonna add in our grated fresh Parmesan cheese. It's about a cup, maybe a smidge less on there. And then I've got pre-shredded Gouda that we're gonna put in there. And we're just gonna put in about a handful as well for it. And this is gonna be for our mac and cheese. Let me grab that cheese before it melts. We're gonna give this a good stir, and then we're gonna add in a little bit of garlic salt. So we'll mix this in and keep it really simple. It's gonna be like a really creamy mac and cheese on there, kind of like a creamy shell. Might add a smidge more cream in here. And a little bit of garlic salt to season it up. You could put a little bit of truffle oil in here if you wanted that. It would be lovely. But just look how gooey and cheesy that is. These are going to be amazing. Beautiful. Put a smidge more cream in there. I like to do it little by little to get to the right consistency instead of trying to do it all at one time. But just look how cheesy this is. Okay. This is looking fantastic. Again, we'll add in a little bit more cream. Then let me get my honey and my butter over here. We're almost to the nice kind of melting things, and then we're gonna brush it over our cornbread, and then we'll let it sit and soak in, and then we'll brush it again. Beautiful. Okay. Let's check out. These are almost done. Looking good. Beautiful. We'll just kind of finish them off, and then we're gonna cook our onions and garlic in here. And then we're gonna be almost ready for our dinner tonight. Slide those guys right over here. Give them beautiful. And these again, they're thin pork chops, so they cook up pretty fast. I think the rule is you just don't want to overcook them, because overcooking them will make them not so good. It'll dry them out. Okay, let's get a little bit of butter in here so we can kind of caramelize our onions with some butter and those meat drippings, which will have all of this wonderful spices in it. And then we'll do a little drizzle of olive oil. There we go. I'm going to turn my heat down nice and low.
You have a couple questions, all about pork chops. Where did you find them?
So these are actually from Aldi's. I got them this week. They have just like your bone-in pork chop kind of bundle. They're a really great price. Like a pack is like $7. Pork chops are pretty cheap but delicious. So I got those there. I also find that Costco has really good pork chops as well. They also have the thin and the thick cut. So thick cut is my favorite, but I can't always find it there. Here we go. We're kind of deglazing the bottom of our pan. You see all those little tasty bits are coming up, and they're gonna really season off these onions, which will add just a ton of flavor to them. And those are all of those spices from our pork chops on there. I realized I forgot to put those onions in too. Get those cooking up. And, man overboard. We're gonna let those sit right there. We are going to brush our honey butter over the top of each one of our little muffins here. We're gonna go through, and again, right before we serve, we're gonna give a great big dollop on them as well. Here we go. But this is kind of gonna soak into the cornbread, and then right before when we serve it up again, we're gonna cover it again. But this really permeates those flavors into it. And then that second one gives you kind of that sticky honey topping. Okay. Beautiful.
Paula sent you a gift.
Oh, well, thank you. We appreciate that, Paula, a lot. Let me get my garlic in here because we are almost ready to serve up. And then we're gonna go grab our asparagus and our acorn squash out of the oven. We're gonna let that kind of saute here, and then we'll be ready to serve up here. Slide this guy right over here, and let's go grab our acorn squash and our asparagus, because again, those cook up pretty fast, and we do have my oven set on the air fryer setting, which means it's gonna cook up a little bit quicker. Beautiful. So here's my acorn squash. If you can, as long as you can like put your finger in and dent it, you'll know they're ready. And then look at this beautiful, vibrant green to the asparagus. That's when you know they're done. You don't want them to turn a yellowish brown. You want them to be a bright kind of green. That's when they're tender and crispy, but cook them all the way through. Let me grab, oh, hey Groom. Let me grab a trivet over here real quick. And beautiful. Okay, there's our caramelizing onions and that garlic cooking up. I'm gonna flip my butternuts or my acorn squash over, and then we'll add our brown sugar, butter, and garlic salt in it. Look how tender they are. And this is kind of that quick steam cooking.
Do the kids eat everything?
They all will eat a variation. Torn, these are his favorite things. He will, if nobody else takes them and there's anything left over, he will eat 2 of them. He absolutely loves squash. But each kid will eat different things. Everybody will probably definitely eat the noodles and the cornbread and the pork chops. Torn, he is like me, he loves everything. I make everyone eat the asparagus because they've got to eat their greens, but that would be the one thing that they would always try to skip off. But gotta eat your green veggies. Okay, got that on low. You're just gonna put a little pat of butter in each one. There we go. And what we'll do is it will melt in there and it's gonna be so delicious. And then you add a little bit of brown sugar as well. So kind of just sprinkle it over. This is gonna melt with the butter and add this nice little extra pop of sweetness. A lot of times my kids will take them and they're like, I need more brown sugar in it. And they just want to keep filling it up with brown sugar. And I was like, you got to eat the squash with it. You can't just eat the brown sugar. But they're like, that's the best part. And then you've got to do this. A little bit of garlic salt over the top. Gives that savory with the sweet, which I think makes it perfect. Okay, let's brush our honey over our corn muffins and then we're gonna serve up because it is dinner time. So our next little bit over this, and you've gotta do a little weight between them. You don't wanna just brush them one time. You want them to seep in. Here we go. Perfect. Beautiful. Now, let's get ready to serve up dinner. We'll do our placement right here, since we've got everything kind of going. Okay, let me get my cheesy mac. And let's go. For dinner tonight, we have our pan-seared pork chops with a nice kind of savory seasoning, garlic, salt, onion powder, Worcestershire. We're gonna top it with our caramelized onions and garlic. We will serve it with an acorn squash that we added butter and brown sugar and a little bit of garlic salt. We've got our garlic black pepper asparagus that we roasted up in the oven. Our cheesy, delicious Gouda and Parmesan mac and cheese, which is so creamy with our shells, so delicious. And then for a little bread base, we've got our honey butter cornbread, which was again another request from our children. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we make for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to our page, search for what we made, and you can watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I got my pans, my pots, all the different things I use in the kitchen for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.